the guy I was with, jumped too, and he's splatting next to me, and I've seen all his stuff is gone. I said, "What the crap were you thinking? Why did you jump? You must have seen me splatter all over the ground." And he said, "Well, I saw you, but I didn't want you to die alone."
This Marquee Dragon video is sponsored by Shattered Crystal, game codes, and items.
My name is Erin Hoffman. I'm a game designer. These are all of my credits. You can take in all of my little stickers here, but the thing that I wanted to add to this is that I started as a player, as I think most of us did way back in the day. I actually started an online writing group when I was 15, and it had roots with partially D&D. It was this kind of retarded thing that wasn't full D&D because my parents wouldn't let me do that because it was satanic. But we used dice, and I was really compelled by these dice. And then in 1997, I started playing Dragon Realms, and 2 years later, I was playing it so much that I became a developer. And that's going to be important later. I actually want to start by talking about Avatar, which statistically most of you have seen, and it should be actually really important to us because it comes from pop culture and it's been very famous and successful, but the really important thing with the story has to do with its roots in symbolic nature. The main character actually stayed on Pandora, and this is actually really critical to us from a storytelling standpoint and from a game standpoint, because the question he was given is, you have your meat body, and there are some things wrong with it, and if you should bail on it, or if you could bail on it, should you? And what was also really critical was that the audience didn't even blink when he decided to stay. It was a non-question. And our inherent ethical question is, if your life sucks, should you bail? And this is something that we've resisted or come up against in game development for a really long time. But their answer so quickly was, yes, of course you should. Why not? That world is better than this world. Even though it was dangerous and full of all of these really nasty things that from a science fiction standpoint, it's not the world where I would live, because things will kill you. But this is also important because of the origins of the word avatar. And there actually have been interpretations of avatar as the 10th coming of Vishnu, because Vishnu in particular in Sanskrit he would appear on Earth in times of great need as a messiah. And the blue skin, he had blue skin when he appeared as Rama. So it goes back a really long ways. And Sanskrit is arguably actually our oldest human contiguous culture, because there's a character in Sanskrit for Shiva that goes back to 2000 BC or so. It's extremely ancient, and it's contiguous. We still have Shiva today. There are people who worship Shiva today. So this is actually really important, because what it tells us is that what's important to us is not our external face, and what's important to us actually needs to be actualized and created in an avatar, and what's inside of us possibly is also divine. So that's not a picture of me when I was 15, but it's actually really close. I've destroyed all evidence of the actual fact, but and this sketch, interestingly, was a sketch that I drew, I think, when I was a teenager, and it wound up on the internet, and I found it last night. So it's really become full circle. It's like, my stuff is on the internet. And how many of you are actually familiar with Dragon Realms? Oh, a handful. Okay. Fond memories, unfond memories? It was a Simulatronics, which created Dragon Realms, actually says that it created the first true MMO, because it was a persistent world that had thousands of people playing on it at the same time, and it was text-based. And so in my teenage life, my parents had separated when I was 5. At the time that I started to play Dragon Realms, my mom was going through a second divorce. I was utterly isolated at school because I was the only person who liked fantasy. I was hiding Anne McCaffrey paperbacks under my desk during geometry and things like that. So I could be utterly isolated, or I could go into this world where I would become something else. I'm not sure why I wanted to be a snake person, but I latched onto it right away. And this is the story that I'd like to tell you guys, because I think we often get so immersed in the development and the creation of these worlds that we don't think about what brought us there in the first place. And when I started to play, and this will be important later too, I met a person. I met many people, but in particular I met one that I started this sort of fantasy online romance with, which is extremely embarrassing to talk about now. But I was 15, and I found this person that I had connected with so deeply without knowing who they were. And when I met him, he was a halfling, and then he rolled up another character to actually be a snake person with me, which was very sweet, by the way. And we we went adventuring. You know, we killed lots of things. We had lots of experiences. Anyone who's familiar with MMOs knows how it feels like an entire life compressed into a couple of weeks. And I was an A student, but I skipped school to play this, which I think my parents don't really know. I think they probably still think I was sick, but I wasn't. And so we went on this adventure into this Baron's Keep in Thuringia, if anyone's familiar with Dragon Realms. It's a mid-level zone. You have to, you know, you've gotten through quite a bit already by the time that you've gotten there. And it's this big, empty, atmospheric castle. And you go up to the top because there's a tall tower, and if there's a tall tower, you go to the top. And at the top of the tall tower, and we were just coming through. We didn't actually plan to go and do this. We didn't know it was up there. There's a window, and at the window, there's a sign that says, "Don't jump." And so, of course, when you have a tall tower and a window and a sign that says, "Don't jump," you know exactly what you have to do. And we decided we were going to jump out the window, and I jumped first. And if you would guess that there was like this amazing reward after doing that, that would be incorrect. If there was a moat full of sharp, rusty spikes that killed us instantly, you would be correct. And not only, and this fall was extremely dramatic, because in text, you usually type in something, and it results in an action. But this one actually seized control of your character, and you fell and fell and fell, and then splat. You know, lots of ASCII effects and all kinds of things. It's actually very traumatic when you're immersed in this world. And not only were we dead, we were obliterated. In Dragon Realms, it's a little bit like World of Warcraft in that if you die, you have to go and find your body and get your stuff. The problem is that if your body is in an inaccessible place, you can't just resurrect. That whole angel statue wasn't there. It's a sissy thing. So I'm sitting at the bottom, and I'm a ghost, and I'm utterly stunned because I'm realizing that I have this cloak that was given to me by my first mentor in the game, who's now not playing anymore. It's actually kind of irreplaceable, even though it's this stupid little item I could go and buy another copy of. But it wasn't my cloak. And I had this broadsword. It was a mahogany-hilted broadsword, and it was awesome, and I killed so many monsters with it, and it was lucky. And now it was going to be gone forever. All of our stuff, gone. And so I'm contemplating this and thinking, man, we are so screwed. Why did we do that? And then all of a sudden, splat! And the guy I was with jumped too, and he's splatting next to me, and I've seen all his stuff is gone. I said, "What crap were you thinking? Why did you jump? You must have seen me splatter all over the ground." And he said, "Well, I saw you, but I didn't want you to die alone." And in that moment, I saw his avatar. I saw something about him, what he was inside, that I think entirely likely, and I don't know who he is really to this day. I know his name was Roger. I think he lived in the Midwest, but that was all I knew about him. And he's out there somewhere, and I know this key thing about him. That yeah, it's when, you know, I actually had this little horror. I'm like, whoa, Roger's going to be here. But that would be the romantic comedy version of this story, and I'm more of an epic fantasy person myself. But I doubt that most of the people in his real life know that about him, that he would do something like that. And it's an utterly irreplaceable moment because no one could really do that for you. We couldn't have this conversation as ghosts at the bottom of a pit of rusty spears talking about how this guy just died for me. And to my husband's great consternation, it is one of the most romantic things anybody has ever said to me. And I remember it, and it left an imprint on me. And these are the kind of things that I think we don't talk about enough, because they're really dorky. And I was that dorky kid, and I'm embarrassed about it. And now I'm a game developer, and really inside of us, we're still dorks, a lot of us. I know I am. And we don't want to talk about that uncomfortable time that we were in, and to some extent, these amazing things that happened to us. So what I want to talk about is, I call it the ethical play contract that I think we sometimes lose touch with, and that is a respect for what's going on in these worlds below what we're seeing. Because particularly as we move more towards metrics-oriented development, which is fabulous, by the way, Darius, but we see things in numbers, which sometimes we need to do, because the operations that we need to do need to be for the greater good, and they actually don't impact these stories. But unless we facilitate the creation of these kind of stories, they won't happen. And a lot of modern worlds are not causing them to happen. It takes a great deal of finesse. I actually interviewed with Blizzard, years ago, before World of Warcraft had really hit its peak, and I asked them, do you have an events system? Do you have a coordination team, a volunteer team to create events in the world? Because that was, to me, it was just a staple, a backbone of what I had experienced in Dragon Realms, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And could not recognize its importance. And they don't have to, because World of Warcraft is a different kind of game, which I also love and is fabulous. But it doesn't scratch the surface of what we can do with these worlds. And I also want to talk about experience architecture, because the more that I work on these games, and I think what we understand more intrinsically than perhaps any other form of game development, is that what we're creating is architecture. We're creating a setup, and in architecture, there's an infinite potential of what we can create. But if we can create things that give the possibility for future action, but don't explicitly cause it, then we have the potential to create really moving player experiences. This is a rock that's a couple miles from where I live. And I took a picture of it because when I looked at it, I saw game design. I saw there's this stack and there's a rock on top of it, and just our basic human nature wants to go and shove that rock and see what's going to happen. And I think that is symbolic of what we can do in online worlds. We need to create these stacks that cause the potential for something to happen, but don't tell you exactly what's going to happen. They let you experience and explore and find out for yourself. And the latest project that I'm working on is, of course, Kung Fu Panda World. And what's full circle for me is that I'm now designing games for kids that were almost the age that I was when I had these sort of radical transformational experiences in worlds that didn't exist. And the landscape itself, as we all know, is radically different than it was, because I'm sure my parents would be mortified if they'd known that I was hanging around with this guy from the Midwest who was probably twice as old as me, frankly. I didn't know, and it's probably better that I didn't know. But we have all of these standards for how explicitly safe everything has to be, and it does, because there's really horrible things that can happen if we let go of that safety. But that doesn't mean that we can't also create potential experiences for people to engage with each other in totally safe ways, the same way that I didn't know anything about Roger. I wouldn't have been able to tell you where he lived or his address or any of the things that we really, really don't want kids to be telling each other. But I knew really critical things about him that were actually harmless. So what we did with Kung Fu Panda was try to ask important questions. And this is all about demographics, which is another subject entirely. But it's amazing what an important question is to a 9-year-old, because they're not the important questions that we think about. But a basic expression like, do you like rice or noodles better, will actually usually cause a 9-year-old to go into a fairly detailed discussion. And that's really interesting, because it means that we can actually set up this experience architecture in very gentle ways that are not at all risk-causing to these kids, while also inspiring them to interact with each other in ways that will wind up being meaningful, and they will form real friendships. And it's still a question as to whether society is ready for this or not, much in the same way that I couldn't have this presentation in front of a large portion of the United States, at least, and be understood. But I think that as developers, we can understand it and be aware of the potential memories and futures that we are creating for our players. And the other thing that we did, I think, which wound up being unexpectedly successful, was lowering the social barriers between getting kids to play games with each other. Because even in an adult-oriented MMO, it's actually quite difficult to ice-break between players. But we knew that in this world, the social connections were going to be the heart of what would keep players coming back to our games. And so we made it excessively easy. It's actually easier to start a game with another player than it is to start a game by yourself, to some extent. And what we see is that our multiplayer games are radically more played within the metrics than our single-player games, which is really interesting. And it means that we're getting at what we want. I don't think we're fully there yet. You know, we've got a long way to go. But it's been an interesting ride. And I think the last thing, let me see how I'm doing on time. The last thing I want to just kind of throw out in front of you, because I realized my presentation was missing a chart, and I didn't want to lose points for that. This is, I call it the wheel of fantasy, or the sociological categories of fantasy. And I think that this is intrinsic to the creation of worlds as well. I think that fantasy comes in certain categories, and we can see this everywhere. And a great MMO actually has at least one from each of these categories. I would love if any of you smart people can tell me what I'm missing, because this is a very prototype phase of what I'm trying to do here. But I'm trying to divide up what are all the fantasies that we want to have, what are the most popular fantasies, and then weight them. And I think that there's some really interesting ethical considerations within why we are fascinated with these things. And I think that by thinking about them more deeply, not only do we come to create better games, but we come to understand ourselves better. And I think that's it. Let's see. Yeah, that's it. And I hope that you will try out Kung Fu Panda World, and this is my white tiger, seriously shocking brain. Actually, if you see anyone in Kung Fu Panda with Brain as their last name, it's probably someone from Human Nature, but we haven't fully verified that, but that's our team name. So yeah. Oh, all done? Okay, thanks.
Everyone defines our lives and everything we do we're alive. I know we'll be alright, 'cause we're